Welcome in to Bears Weekly, powered by IGS Energy, a Chicago Bears network production. Bears Weekly is brought to you by Advocate Healthcare, Athletico Physical Therapy, CDW, Connie's Pizza, IGS Energy, and Miller Lite. Here are your hosts, Jeff Joniak, a.k.a. the Mayor of Bearsville, and his sidekick, Tom the Surfmaster Thayer.
Well, there is about to be some moving and shaking in the NFL next week. Free agency opens, pro days underway, top 30 visits commencing, and within the next 60 days, the Bears roster is going to look a whole lot different. We tackle all of it tonight on Bears Weekly here on ESPN 1000 and the Chicago Bears Radio Network with Super Bowl winning Bears guard Tom Thayer and former Bears quarterback Jim Miller from SiriusXM NFL Radio. I'm Jeff Joniak. Coming up on the program, we visit with an outstanding draft analyst who's also does the job that Tom Thayer does for the Houston Texans. John Harris from footballtakeover.com. Jimmy, you know him. He's a crazy draft guy, right?
There's a lot of guys out there at this time of the year that are true gems around the league. And, you know, you guys talked to Brugler last week and, you know, the stuff that he does. But, you know, there's all these cottage industries that have just branched out and done so well because of the draft. People are nuts for the draft. And it's just, think about it. It's just the calling of a name. Yeah. And it's broadcasted on TV. It's crazy.
Right. Yeah. And you're right. It is a cottage industry. And that's how I framed his role in this. But he'll break down the draft coming up in a couple of segments from now. Our producers tonight, Dan Briley and Jordan Tredup, and the ESPN studio, Justin Pottinger. Executive producer of the Bears Radio Network is Eric Ostrowski. All right. So nothing is official until the new league year starts on Wednesday. So we have to talk about this as reported, okay? Everything's reported. But what we're hearing, the Bears have done some really big things on the offensive line, Tom. We talked about it. They didn't shy away from talking about it at the Combine. Ryan Poles, also the new head coach, Ben Johnson. So some big moves on the offensive line, reportedly bringing the Bears what looks to be two starting guards.
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is when you're hired as a new head coach and you come into a building for the first time, the first thing that you want to do is change the culture of the building. And that means the in-building work ethic. That means the on-the-practice field work ethic. And that's the off-season preparations, how you go about your business. And these two names, you know, they've dominated the headlines in the landscape of the NFL in the last couple of days, and I think they do a lot for the building. And then secondly, just through my thinking, is last year when you look at the Leadership Council and you have no offense and defensive linemen on the Leadership Council, the first thing that I'm going to do with this new Leadership Council, it's these two guys are going to have a role in it. They're going to have a hand in it. And then what they can do professionally, how they can expedite the development of a young football player, a draft choice, or even a person in a new position. So I'm excited going forward, and I think what it's going to bring to this team, organization, and building.
Two names that they're very familiar with. Obviously, Ben Johnson knows one of the guards, and certainly Ryan Poles very familiar with the Kansas City product as well. So it's got to be first things first. This offense has to get it corrected. It's been pretty anemic for quite some time.
Let's begin the discussion about Joe Thuney, because I think Tom hit upon it. Everything you hear about him is leader. Somebody to go. I mean, he's been to 6 Super Bowls in his 9 years. That's crazy. He's been with 2 Hall of Fame quarterbacks, Tom Brady, and eventually Patrick Mahomes is going to be in that same conversation. So, you know, how important is that for the entire offense and the entire team that Joe Thuney is a Chicago Bear? I'll start with you, Jimmy.
Yeah, I think, you know, he's been there. He's done that. He's achieved a lot of success. He'll probably bring that mentality of how the Kansas City Chiefs were, you know, they were fighting. This guy's a versatile guy. We know he's put in some bad spots. He's been kicked out to left tackle more than on numerous occasions for the Kansas City Chiefs and has come through for his team. At that time, when he signed with Kansas City, he signed for tackle money, even though he was a guard. That's how highly regarded he was there by Kansas City. And I think really his numbers stack up. They prove it, and we'll see where it goes. But Caleb needs a lot of help, and it's got to start with his offensive line because the sacks have got to stop. The sacks have got to stop. If the Bears keep shooting themselves in the foot that way, it's hard to play on schedule when you're always 2nd and 10, 2nd and 20, 2nd and 15, 3rd and 17. Those situations are never good for anybody. It's got to get rectified.
Well, I think at any position that you need consistency the most is the offensive line, and it's the work that you put in from OTAs all the way to the first regular season game to the last regular season game. When you talk about an alpha male like Tune, I think he's only missed 2 games in his career, it's availability. It's the guy that's at practice. He's in the meeting rooms every day. He's able to have conversations with whomever the left tackle is going to be or whoever the center is going to be. And like I said, if they're young guys, he has a chance to expedite the learning curve because he has experience at the left tackle position. He plays offensive guard, and I'm sure if you asked him to go there and play center in a desperation moment, he could do that equally as well.
All right, Jonah Jackson, reportedly going to be a Bear after the Bears making a deal with the L.A. Rams. Injured last year, Jim, but he's only 28. And this is a hedge on what free agency may or may not reveal here in the coming days about the lack of availability of some really good talent. So they jumped the gun. They reportedly make these trades. And what are we getting potentially here in Jonah Jackson?
Well, he was a one-time Pro Bowler there in Detroit, so he knows the offense. Obviously, Ben Johnson knows his skill set. I do like that power side with him and Darnell Wright, and we'll see what unfolds. But like you said, he signs a 3-year, I think it was a $51 million deal for the Rams, doesn't even make it through his first year. He only played 4 games, got hurt, and probably wants to go back and be in an offense that's his comfort zone, where he performed very well. So I do think they significantly, with Tooney, with Jonah Jackson, have gotten better at the guard spot.
You know, one thing about him, too, is he was at the beginning of change in Detroit, and he understands what that's all about. And I think when you brought in to be the same type of culture changer on the right-hand side of the offensive line, I think he has the ability to do it and, like, you know, helping the center and helping a young guy like Darnell Wright. And now you're talking about a guy that has experience in Jackson and a guy that is, the more experience he gets, the better he's going to become. So I think, you know, however, 4/5 of the offensive line, 3/5 of the offensive line are probably in place already. Now you have to see where they go in the center and left tackle position.
So, Tommy, how excited are you about this? Because it's one thing to say you're going to go and get X, Y, and Z to build this offensive line. It's another to pull it off. And they've already reportedly done it through trades before even tapping into free agency or the draft. And as you said, Darnell Wright, he's in place. Everything else is up for discussion. But they're going to continue to build this thing. And we had this discussion a couple of weeks ago, Tommy. We've talked about it every day through texts. How are you going to do it? Why are you going to do it this way? And, you know, you can't draft 5 rookies to start a season. So you got to dig in and get some experience in addition. So are you intrigued here at a minimum and excited at a maximum at how this is coming together so quickly?
You know, the thing about Tune and Jackson, for that matter, you're still not uncertain about the way they go about their business. You know how they go about their business, and you know the successes that they've had. And you talk about a couple of guys that the way the offensive line finished the season last year and where they're at already before the season gets underway, Tune, he's going to walk into that room and he's going to be one of the most important characters on this football team. I don't care what position you play. And I've seen that before, and I've seen that role of importance. And so when you talk about a guy that's going to lead by example, there's no better guy that you want to have on your football team is a guy that stands up front in front of this young quarterback who's in the developmental stages and is, you know, working with a young head coach that has to have those pieces in place. And I'm glad that Ryan Poles went out and did his research and work and brought in a couple guys that are day one starters. They're going to be in a 3-point stance opening day of the regular season.
Jim, there is nothing more important than building a high-caliber offensive line for an NFL football team. Yes, it's the quarterback, but the quarterback can struggle behind a bad offensive line. This has got to happen this year. Like, this is so important for the future.
Yeah, I agree with Tom. Tooney was brought in to really further the development of Patrick Mahomes. I think they knew how talented he was, but once that was settled, he really started to take off as a quarterback. I'd say the same thing for Philadelphia. If you look at the Philadelphia Eagles, their money is in their offensive line because Jalen Hurts at that time was under his rookie deal. Right now he's got the big-time contract, but, they had paid Mailata, they had paid Lane Johnson, Kelsey was getting paid, Jason Kelsey, the center at the time. And then you see the fruits of the labor of what the Philadelphia Eagles were able to do. At some point you have to invest in your offensive line, and specifically when it's a young quarterback who's trying to develop. And for Caleb, this is a crucial year. Last year was a waste. It really was a waste for me. And so it starts over, put some competent, legitimate players around him, and we'll see where it goes with the quarterback. And I like how Ben Johnson has addressed the quarterback, that he's got to strip him down and start from ground zero.
That's Jim Miller, Tom Thayer, Jeff Joniak. We'll take a break. More coming up here on Bears Weekly on ESPN Chicago and the Bears Radio Network. This segment of Bears Weekly brought to you by IGS Energy with Tom Thayer and Jim Miller, Jeff Joniak. I mean, the off seasons the past several years have been dominated by the Chicago Bears, Tommy. The line of scrimmage, we're talking about it at length. But there's other things the Bears need, and they also reportedly are going to be able to sign Durham Smythe, another domer at the tight end position from the Miami Dolphins, Tommy. Reportedly a 1-year contract to join Cole Kmet.
Tight end you heard it here, first, second, and third. But, so I don't want you to you almost changed my mind there a little bit, because after coming out of the break, I wanted to say, even though they brought in 2A and Jonah Jackson, they have Darnell Wright, I don't want them to shy away from, targeting good offensive linemen in the draft.
Oh, yeah.
Whether they play offensive guard, tackle, or center. Because you talk about what, with a new offensive line coach, a new offensive line room, with a couple of experienced veterans, what they can do to some offensive linemen that they could draft, either to play immediately or play down the road. And you still have to have a bunch of talent, because you shared some messages with me over the last couple of days about where the offensive line was at in the last couple of years, and how many different starting lineups, how many different players they used, and the variations of position changes. So just because you got a couple of good experienced veterans doesn't mean you ignore other guys that are valuable to you in the draft.
Yeah, Bears, I'll go over the number again. They were 25th in the NFL in running the football. And I think this is a sign that they are going to run the football more, because Durham Smythe is more of a blocker. Yeah, he'll get you like 15 receptions a year, but he's a blocker at the end of the day. And so that'll allow Cole Kmet to still do his receiving capabilities, in terms of the receptions at the end of the day. But make no mistake about it, this is a sign. Look at Detroit last year, how when they went heavy personnel, they would bring in an extra offensive lineman. I think now when you just look at the signing of Durham Smythe, he's going to be the big guy out there in running situations, or if they go 12 personnel where they can really pound you a little bit running the football. So block, you get the rock, right? So I think Smythe, he's more of a blocker. So maybe he will get the rock, more than 17 receptions than he had last year for the Miami Dolphins.
Hey, let's not forget they put that big man Skipper out there for the extra blocker too.
Dan Skipper.
This excites me so much, because all three of us love running the football. I will never shy away from it. I think it's absolutely necessary to win in the National Football League, whether it be the tough yards when you need them.
Look at Philadelphia. Philadelphia. Yeah. I mean, sign Saquon Barkley, but that line is no joke. That line is no joke. In the trenches, when we say you win and lose football games, there was probably no better team than Philadelphia on both sides of the ball in the trenches. And so I think it's out there for everybody to see.
And Tommy, the short yardage stuff. I mean, how many times have we pulled our hair out about short yardage?
Yeah, that's the thing about Ben Johnson. I like the fact that he's so clever, and he can really keep you off balance, and he can keep you thinking. They can put in 7 offensive linemen, 6 offensive linemen, and you can say, okay, they have this big, strong side here with 3 offensive linemen next to each other with the tight end next to him. That's the obvious point of attack. And then what do? They run a jet sweep. They run some type of cleverly designed play. So going forward, just because the personnel's on the field doesn't make them predictable. it makes them a little bit more unpredictable, because what we've seen over the last couple of years with Ben running the Detroit offense and how, he, pulled a rabbit out of the hat.
Yeah, sure did. I don't know if I told you, Jim, the first time I sat down with Coach Johnson before his introductory news conference, he goes, "How'd you call Stumblebum?" And I'm like, I didn't call it very well, because I didn't know until after the game it was a prop, so to speak. So he's clever, and he is unpredictable, as Tom said. So it's going to be fun when this is all put together. He's got a lot of different influences in that room, offensively speaking. Yes, he's got all the guys from Detroit, Antoine Randall and JT Barrett and all that, but there's other influences offensively from the Sean Payton tree. We've gone through the tree. So I'm really excited to see what else he wants in terms of personnel, what he'd like to have, and how they pull this off and when they put it together.
Yeah, he's going to, once he gets the guys on the field, like through free agency and the draft, and they have a vision of what they think it'll look like, and then you take the players out on the field and you really diagnose what they can and cannot do, and, for a lot of players, even like Caleb, when they start diving into the playbook, Ben is going to realize, all right, he's capable of doing this right now. He's not quite there on doing these things that we believe he can do, but he's got to show us. He's got to prove it to us. So I'm a big believer in you can't call plays on what a player hasn't mastered. You're going to call plays where you hang your hat on the things you do well. That means that these players say on these go plays that they can execute them. Everybody's got the assignment and everybody's doing what they're asked to do. And then through the OTAs, they're going to experiment. And they're going to see, all right, this guy can do this. This guy, all right, he's shown us he can do that. And now the playbook starts to expand on what your players can do. That's why, I was kind of animate that everybody just thinks the Detroit Lions playbook is coming to Chicago. No, that'll sort itself out. He's got to see the players first. Like I said, they have a vision, but now sorted out what they can and cannot do, and maybe players will grow into doing more, and then you can start to expand the playbook from that standpoint.
The only thing that's guaranteed per game is the script. Everything, as soon as that script is over, if you have early first quarter success and you run through this script within the first drive or two, then it's, every one of those guys, it's their accountability, making sure they understand their assignments from every single play that can be called by Coach Johnson against whatever defense they're playing against that week. And I think that's when you really grow to appreciate a well-organized, well-coached football team, is when they have that versatility of unpredictability that can factor in for a play caller.
The beauty of the script is in its deceit. So, you just don't call the first 15. You set somebody up for something in the third or fourth quarter. Those are the best play callers, Jim, right? And in your career, were you always scripted in the first 15?
Yeah, pretty much. It's very rarely that you go off script unless you have maybe a big play that ends up in the red zone and you're already in the red zone and calling those plays. But, yeah, the script normally is going to go to plan to see how a defense is going to play those certain personnel groupings and what they've had trouble stopping in the past. But, yeah, you're right. As the game goes along, and if you're in tune with your play caller, you can almost say, oh, he's setting up this.
Yeah. He's
setting up that, all right, yep, it's the time for this play. And, you're thinking a couple plays ahead of what's going to unfold, as the game rolls along.
For football fans, I think the script is a nuance that has been discussed in recent vintage. So, Tom, I go back to you, the man who's played the longest and been a part of the football world the longest out of the three of us. Did you guys script plays?
Yes. And it started in the first team meeting when we installed the running game on Wednesday, because Coach Ditka would get up there and he would start explaining the susceptibilities of the defense we're getting ready to play. And so this is what he's going to be thinking in the running game, and this is how we're going to attack the opponent. And then when we go Thursday, install the passing game, he says, hey, this is the way we're going to play off the running game, and this is how we're going to attack downfield and the play action, the downfield passing game. I think it's something that's always been a part of the process of football. The thing that's changed the most to me really is the involvement of analytics on the defensive side of the ball, because defensive coaches can't script their first 15. they're kind of calling defense according to personnel, down and distance, and what they feel their strength can be against the opponent personnel they're seeing.
I got a question for you as we go to break. Tom, did you ever have a script that called for 15 straight running plays?
One game. We were playing the Indianapolis Colts in Chicago. It was really windy. I think Steve Fuller was starting at quarterback, and Ditka came up to us before kickoff, and he said, "Hey, you guys, I'm not going to throw the ball at all today." And I think we ran the ball like the first 22 plays of the game.
Oh, that's beautiful.
And we only threw it a couple times in the course of the game. But that's kind of conditions alert.
Yeah.
That's not something that you plan for on Wednesday, and then you get there Sunday. So it's about, probably similar to that San Francisco game of a couple of years ago that we called that had 40-mile-an-hour winds off the lake.
Yeah, that was the Nathan Vasher 108er. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, the missed field goal return. Jim, did you ever have a script that called for a heavy amount of runs?
No script, but I'll tell you what, a lot of 4-minute drills ended with a lot of runs. That's for sure.
Of course, yes.
Tom
doesn't like the 4-minute offense.
Yeah, in Pittsburgh with Jerome Bettis, he could close games out.
Tom rolls his eyes when he hears about the Final Four.
I think it's a reward. I think you earn that 4-minute drive because now you're in control of the game, and you're saying I think Michigan this year had a game where they ran at the final 20 plays of the game, maybe against Penn State or something. So it's a reward. It's something that's earned, Hard to say, okay, if you had success in 4-minute offense, run it at the start of the game, just like you would at the end of the game.
Right, exactly. All right, we'll go to break. When we come back, we'll hear from John Harris, my conversation at the Scouting Combine last week with the man who created footballtakeover.com. That's coming up next here on Bears Weekly on ESPN 1000 of the Bears Radio Network. This segment of Bears Weekly brought to you by Athletico Physical Therapy. Visit athletico.com to request an in-clinic or virtual appointment and start feeling better tomorrow.
We got a special guest. Now, he is the veteran radio broadcaster for the Houston Texans on a great crew, but this guy knows the NFL draft like nobody's business. His name is John Harris. Footballtakeover.com. That's a side gig.
It is.
In this cottage industry of covering the NFL, right? When did that start, and what is it all about?
So footballtakeover.com started a couple years ago, but Jeff, I've been covering the draft since I came out of college. I love drafts. My buddy Lance Erline, who works for NFL.com, we grew up together. We used to, I remember the baseball game, Stratomatic. You remember that?
Of course, yeah.
The dice game. So we would sit there at night on a Saturday night, and we would draft our team. His brother, the three of us, we would draft our teams. We loved the draft. Mm-hmm. And then Lance's dad ended up in the NFL, and we just have had such a jonesing for the NFL, and we're talking about draft forever. And then Mark brought me over in 2014, and one of the first things we did was the draft. And we go for 16 hours live radio on the draft. And so the Saturday of day 3, he took me off the air for 4 hours, thought I needed it. And I'm like, I told him after that, I said, no, don't take me off.
And Mark, by the way, would be the veteran voice of the Houston Texans, Mark Vandermeer?
Yeah, that's right. And I said, don't take me off. I said, let me go pillar to post. I study these guys. I love it. I love everything about it. And footballtakeover.com kind of allows me to step out of my Texans shell and really, former coach, so I love watching tape or video or whatever everybody calls it now. And I just get into it. I love college football. I love how it kind of merges with the draft and then come to the combine, Senior Bowl, events like that. I try not to miss. And it's just, we all have a passion. And football has been mine. My dad coached football, and I just gravitated towards it. And that's it. I don't golf. I don't fish. I don't hunt. I'll go in my dark room and I will watch a prospect from North Dakota State at times. So it's a sickness.
Gray Zabel, possibly?
Yeah, Gray Zabel's a hell of a football player, and he's one. Cam Miller, maybe the quarterback, not for us, but maybe for another team down the road on day 3. Their quarterback led them to national championship. So, people ask me, they know in Houston, they don't have to ask anymore. It's a sickness. My wife is okay with it. Found no cure. She's like, just start a website. I was like, okay. So we did that a couple years ago.
Well, the thing is, knowledge is power, as we know, and if you talk it without any notes, which is what you do, right? Like, the draft.
Yeah.
So let's dig in a little bit, because from a Bears perspective, it marries up with the needs theoretically, the Bears in the trenches. Should they decide to add another running back, that's a strong part of the draft. But I want to focus on the line of scrimmage. So you were at the Senior Bowl. I called the Senior Bowl. Yep. There's a plethora of defensive interior specialists. There's edge rushers. There's a certain group of tackles, and then maybe a bunch of guards that could be tackles or tackles that could be guards. What's your impression of those positions in particular at the line of scrimmage? Let's start on the offensive side of the ball.
Yeah, I think guard and center, not great. Okay. I think what you're getting from guard and center are going to be guys that transition from tackle to guard and center. You mentioned Gray Zabel. He played left tackle at North Dakota State, but didn't. I think he maybe took 2 reps that I can remember at the Senior Bowl. It was guard center the entire time. Hell of a player, I think. Back end of day one, I think he's in the mix because I don't know that there's that level of tackle in this draft, or just offensive linemen in general in this draft. I'm a big fan of Tyler Booker from Alabama. I talked to some people from Alabama at the Senior Bowl, and one of the things I wanted to know was, I can look at the film and go, okay, that's a dude. What's he like off the field? I want to know that. And they were like, alpha, team player, captain, like everything we want.
High character.
Yep, high character, football character guy. And I know that's something that will resonate with Ryan Poles, being an offensive lineman himself. So, but after that, at guard, okay, we can transition maybe Kelvin Banks from Texas. I know there's been some talk about that. There's a little bit of worry about the length and how long his arms are. But I've seen so many times, and we're in Indianapolis. Braden Smith got drafted from Auburn. And all the talk was, well, he's going to guard. He's going to guard. Well, he's 8 years into his career, 9 years maybe now. I haven't seen him play guard one time against us. So there's a lot of talk about tackles that go into guard. But I do think there will be some action because there's just not much after Tyler Booker. Dylan Fairchild from Georgia. A couple centers that might be able to play guard. But there's just not much. Tackle position, to me, I had Kelvin Banks going in. Kelvin's a Houstonian. I've watched him a lot. When he was a freshman, I was like, okay, that guy's headed for an NFL future. But one of the things I like to do, and it's obvious, but I want to see guys against the best. So I want to see Texas against Georgia, and you go, oh, boy, Kelvin struggled. He struggled with the speed of the guys that were bounding off the edge. So there's a talk about him maybe going into guard. I think Kelvin's going to end up at tackle, even though I know there were some scouts that wrote him up at guard. Will Campbell, I think, is probably the best tackle in his draft. I don't think he's as good as some of the tackles we've seen in previous years, but I also probably am a little slang because I see Larry Tunsil every day. And, I mean, when you say to me, what does an offensive tackle look like? I'm like, that's what it looks like. But I think Will Campbell is the type of mentality, and I think that's as important as anything else. You've got to have that mentality. I think Will Campbell has it. I think Kelvin has it. You could tell the Texas offensive line didn't adapt as much when Kelvin was out. That also tells you something. So I think those are the top 2 tackles, and then where Gray fits is going to be pretty interesting. The guy that I'll say this, I stumbled upon him in 2023. And one thing with college football, as you know, Jeff, NIL and portal, there are guys that end up one place, and then they end up another, and you're like, wait. So I'm watching Ohio State in 2023, and I'm like, that left tackle looks pretty good. Who is that? It's Josh Simmons. And I'm like, what's his background? I'm like, I don't remember him playing with CJ the year before. Well, he transferred from San Diego State, jumping into the offense. I'm like, boy, I like him. Lo and behold, beginning of 2024, what do I hear? Hey, Josh Simmons rising up boards. Really athletic guy. He's coming off an injury, but movement skills, a guy you can keep at left tackle. And I know there's, where does Braxton go? What happens with Braxton? Is there an upgrade there or not? Can you use Braxton together with another tackle? I just think, and I've always been a big believer, draft really good offensive linemen and then figure it the hell out.
Yeah.
That's what the Colts did with
the best 5.
That's right. Get the best 5 out there, however they can fit together. Have a plan for it, and then coach them up and get the most out of them. And if you've got the right guy, that guy will learn how to do it. He will learn, like, hey, give me all the athletes in the world, but you give me a guy that's like athletic, coachable. I can turn him into a player. And Dwayne Brown was really kind of the guy that really taught me that when he came to the Texans. I was not a fan of the draft pick. I was very vocal about that. But Dwayne was committed to being great. That's the one thing we'll never know. But if these guys are committed to being great on top of the athletic, and that's why it was really good to hear that about Tyler Booker from Alabama, from the people from Alabama. Like, he's committed to being great. It's not about the bag. It's not about the money. It's about how good can he be as a player to help the team where he's drafted.
a note on him. I just love how he just sits in there too. Yeah. That rear end just anchors in, right?
It's so funny. I get made fun of all the time. My buddy Lance Erline is sitting over there, and we always talk about that. Oh man, his butt is so big. You know, his thighs. Look at his thighs.
Right.
And I always get made fun of in Houston for that. But I'm okay with it. I understand it because those are the things. You know, scouts are looking at that. You know, look at his calves. My God, and he's so stout. And that was something we just weren't able to do this year. We were not able to hold up in the middle. We didn't get a great year out of Shaq Mason. But we weren't alone. Watch other teams and you watch the interior struggle. The Chiefs' interior struggle in the Super Bowl against the Eagles.
Which leads me to this because, Ryan Poles was asked about defensive line and the need for another edge rusher to complement Montez Sweat. However, he went right to the interior.
Yep.
Andrew Billings, outstanding. Defense really struggled top of the run when he went out. He's signed. Poles loves him.
Right.
Javon Dexter's got nothing but talent. He's still young. Big takeoff year here. But you can't have enough.
That's right.
And you got to get that interior pressure on these quarterbacks. And the mobile ones or the pocket passes, it doesn't matter. You got to cloud their vision. You got to put pressure. Those twists, those stunts, the ability to kick outside if you need to, all that. With that being said, we keep hearing the defensive tackle position double the kind of prospects from a year ago. Would you agree?
Absolutely. And I think it's going to be interesting how teams go about it, too, because you think about, and Nick Caserio, GM of the Texans, we always kind of talk about supply and demand, economics. And the supply is absolutely massive in that group this year. And the demand is definitely high. But we just talked about a couple of groups, interior offensive line. The supply is low, very low. So if you're a team that has both needs, and you mentioned two guys that can absolutely, you think about those guys inside, man, you got to have dudes inside that you can roll in. And the way that D'Amico plays his defense, and I'm sure Dennis does the same thing, you can't just have one. No, like I look at the Titans, they got Jeffrey Simmons, and he's a stud. He's got to come out of the game at some point. And that was one of the things that we did well last year, kind of rotating those guys. But the point being, do you draft an interior offensive lineman because you know those aren't going to be available on day two? Right. And then say, hey, we're going to take a guy on day two that should have been a round one guy, but because there's so many defensive tackles, interior defensive linemen, so versatile, so adaptable, let's get that guy on day two. Now, it's a little bit of a game of guts poker, but I think if you want to maximize that, and I always look at this, would you rather have offensive lineman X and defensive lineman Y, or would you rather have offensive lineman X, defensive lineman Y? So, meaning, do I want this offensive lineman with a really good defensive tackle, but a lesser offensive lineman and a very similar tackle? And I think that's the thing you can find in this draft. So teams are going to go through that. I think teams, Jeff, are going to have an issue in a sense. Like, we really want some of these defensive tackles, but we got to get one of these interior offensive line guys. We don't get them. We'll take that guy. We'll take the top offensive lineman and the fifth defensive tackle, because in normal years, that fifth defensive tackle would have been one or two. But it's just that good a group this year.
Appreciate your time.
You got it, brother. Thank you.
We'll have more here on ESPN 1000 of the Bears Radio Network after this timeout. This segment of Bears Weekly is brought to you by CDW, people who get it. With Tom Thayer and Jim Miller, Jeff Joniak breaking things down with the Bears. A lot of great news pointing in the right direction with the news this week of some deals, reportedly. Everything becomes official next week. What else is on your minds collectively? We'll start with Tommy about next week in free agency. There's still a lot of cap room. My eyes are still very laser focused on the draft, so I want to get those young guys in here, obviously. What is your purview of this situation?
You know, I wish I knew a little bit more about the status of Jaquan Brisker, because I think he's a brilliant player. I think he's one of the best safeties when he's healthy in the National Football League. But if you look at Kevin Byers and you look at Jaquan Brisker, I think you need to solidify that position for Dennis Allen as much as any other position on the defensive side of the ball. Yeah, they're still looking for interior defensive linemen and pass rushers, and I think that investigative work will be done until, into the regular season. I said why we need a little bit more on the offensive line. And I'd be interested to see if there's a running back out there that piques their interest, and piques the interest mostly of a guy like Ben Johnson that feels like this guy can really come and be an immediate contributor to the running back room. And those are a couple positions of concern, but not knowing a lot about Jaquan Brisker, when we haven't seen him since early last season, I do have curiosity about him.
How about you, Jim?
Yeah, I think, I'm with Tom on the defensive line and pass rushers. O-line's going to be interesting because, centers have been a really good pick. The guys, I always bring up Travis Frederick, Nick Mangold. There are undrafted free agents that have started, say David Andrews of the New England Patriots, the opening day of their rookie years. This is a very strong center class where the Bears are picking at 10. If they did want to select a left tackle, and they could take the top left tackle if they needed to, if that's the direction they want to go in, and then still come back later in the draft, say John Manheim from USC is available. I would think Gray Zabel's already gone from North Dakota State, that many project as a center and to be a first-round pick. He's got versatility, but there are still really good centers later in the draft if they want to address tackle at the earliest pick in the draft.
Lance Zierlein had the Bears in his latest mock draft. He had the Bears picking, I think, Will Campbell at 10.
Yeah.
And then trading back with Philadelphia into the first round at 32 to get Gray Zabel.
Beautiful. That would be beautiful. That would be,
to me.
If they could do that, to double up at a position, meaning the offensive line, it's not unheard of. It's not unheard of. I think it's got to be addressed, and we'll see how aggressive the Bears. But if they were able to do that, that would be a win. I know a lot of people are talking about Will Campbell's arm length, but they're 33 and 7/8. Okay, let's just call him 34. Okay, it's okay. He'll be all right because
that's pretty good.
I played with Matt Light. He only had 32-inch arms, and the guy was awesome. So just watch him play football.
Right. Just listen. Offensive play by tackles is because of their feet, not because of their arm length. Yeah. So that's one thing. And one thing about the center position too is when the Kansas City Chiefs, they drafted Creed Humphrey, Tunay was there at the guard position. So maybe he could get, be a little bit of an influence of what to look at within the talents of a center in order to kind of look at him and say, okay, this guy, I think that he could be a day one starter.
As we look at free agency, we always look at ages. So with free agency coming before the draft and starting next week, we're really intrigued by it all. But there's a bunch of defenders that are in still that sweet spot of 25 to 28. I call that the sweet spot. I don't know where you guys look at it. Do you care about that type of thing? Like if I'm going to invest in a free agent, more often than not, when I'm talking about investment, I'm not talking about a one-year deal, which has certainly become almost an epidemic in the NFL right now and a necessity. The older guys that have been around a bit are getting one-year deals. Look what Zach Bond turned into, though, right? One-year deal, and now he's a rich man there in Philadelphia. But on the defensive line, guys like people probably haven't heard about this guy, defensive tackle Tershawn Wharton from Kansas City. That guy had very productive minimal snaps. He's just 27. Levi Onwuzurike, he's just 27. But when he was right, he was effective, dent in the pocket. Milton Williams from Philadelphia, defensive tackle. He's going to make a lot of money. Then you got Azeez Ojulari, did not work out for the New York Giants. Out of Georgia, high draft pick. He's just 25 years old. This shocked me. Am I right on this? Chase Young is only 26?
Yep.
What? Feels like he's been in the league forever. Do you take some swings at some of these reasonable deals?
How many snaps do you want him to play per game? Because one thing, when you're looking at a defensive lineman, you're talking about a guy that if you can get 30 dominant snaps a game out of him, then you're going to win the position and you're going to help the overall rotation of the defensive line. Offensive line, you got to be looking at about 70 plays per game, and then you start taking age into consideration. And the reason I'm not concerned about a guy like Tunay, because the modern-day NFL is a lot different than the old NFL. You can stay younger and fresher a lot longer. And so that's why some of these guys that are in their mid-20s, as you called the sweet spot, is that what you said?
Yeah.
I think their life is yet to begun in the NFL in some of those respects. So if you have identifiable traits on film that those guys are coachable and they can be contributors, listen, I'm going to kick the tires on every one of them.
Yeah, I just think for the Bears, it'd be draft and develop on defense.
Yeah.
I want the offense, filled with veterans around the young quarterback. So granted, we're saying they should draft a young center, but again, if you look at other teams, they'll invest in free agency on one side of the ball and then typically draft and develop on the other side. And there's all those pass rushers. There's nothing against them, but Chase Young, it's kind of come and gone for him. I know he's a young player, but he really hasn't been the same after he's come back from that ACL injury. We even did an interview once a week with Ron Rivera, who was then the head coach of the Commanders. And they just really, he was scared to get back out on the field. He just didn't have confidence in his knee. Then he gets traded to San Francisco. He lost snaps towards the end of the year in postseason because his play was lackluster. And then New Orleans Saints signed him, and he really hasn't done anything there. So I would think they'd target a young draft pick because, guys like DeMarcus Lawrence and other free agents will probably be too much money.
Or Josh, how about Josh Sweat? He's going to make some money.
Sweat's going to make a ton.
Indianapolis defensive end Dio Adenabo, 25. He's got 34 sacks and hits combined the last 2 years. He's been doing a nice job there for the Colts. That's a name that just popped up.
And that's a good fit because Dennis Allen is typically a 4-man front guy, and that's what Indianapolis has been as well. So, I don't think that's out of the realm of possibility at all. I think that's a good name to throw out there, Jeff.
And here at the safety position, Tom, we saw him in the opener at Soldier Field, I think in the rain game that Justin Fields did the great slide in the end zone. And Talanoa Hufanga. That's a bad man at safety. He's just 26. He's a free agent.
Yeah, again, I would have to do a little investigative work on his health status. Is he available and ready to go for the long haul? And if you're playing a physical position of impact, is there something that's affecting you that maybe could factor in the long-term performance if there is something? So, listen, if I and Jim were sitting here and we were playing fantasy football and you're just taking the name of the day or guys that you really like coming out of college, it'd be easy. But you can't be naive in your approach to say, look, you really got to be thinking of some of the details about some of these players.
No question about it. We don't know their health situation either. That's the scary thing about free agency. You're not bringing them in for a look. You're not putting them on the field, right? You're just signing them. You're trusting the agents.
Yeah, it's style of play, too, that I think Tom's referring to, because I agree with Tom. I like Jaquan Brisker. I think we know he's a physical safety that really will throw his body in. And that's what Hufanga is, too, but they're different sizes. And so you have to wonder, are they too reckless with how they play? Because they will literally, give up their bodies, to make a play. And that's why they both have missed time. They play like Tasmanian devils when they're out there, but you got to keep them out there.
That's like Jim Kreiner was the former Iowa State head football coach when I was a student there, and I used to interview him before games. And his popular phrases, I want our guys to play with a reckless abandon. So that's giving up your body, right? That's what he loved. All right, we'll take a break. One more segment to go with Jim Miller and Tom Thayer. I'm Jeff Joniak. This is ESPN Chicago and the Bears Radio Network. This segment of Bears Weekly is brought to you by IGS Energy with Tom and Jim. Jeff Joniak here on Bears Weekly to wrap things up. There's a lot of stuff going on in the league, obviously, with the business season right now, but a couple of things post-combine. Jim, I'll start with you. I don't know how severe this is, but the Georgia outside linebacker, Jalen Walker, expected to be a top 10 pick, one of the top edge players, injured during training in a thigh injury, so he's not going to work out for his pro day on April 17th. Is this a concern? Do you know anything more about this particular injury and what that means?
Yeah, I thought it was just a thigh injury. I don't think it'll be anything that that'll drop him in the draft. Say Abdul Carter, like the top rusher, he's dealing with a stress fracture. Is that going to need surgery? I think you worry more about Abdul Carter than say the Georgia linebacker. But you watch Georgia. they practice. They call their practices and pads like their first practice and pads is on Tuesday. They call it Bloody Tuesday for a reason. I mean, this team, they get after it. They get after it. And if you watch Walker play, he's a blitzer from the outside. He's a heat-seeking missile from the inside. He's a lot like Roquan Smith. I brought up Roquan's name, and he said, yeah, that's the first player we throw up his tape at Georgia, because that's who we all want to be like. And if you watch him play, he plays a lot like Roquan. He is around the football all the time. And I'd say the same thing about the safety. Malachi Starks, go watch him play. Go watch his blitzes. It's like see ball, get ball. That's it, and that's all he sees is getting to the football. It's pretty fun to watch.
A lot of these guys you always have to take in consideration, even like the Philadelphia guys and some of their free agent off defensive linemen. You got to think of the supporting cast that they're playing with, because sometimes you get a little bit more freedom because they have more concern about some of the other star quality players on the inside and the outside of them. You imagine a team like Georgia and the way they play in those practices on Tuesday, it would probably make the offense a little bit uncomfortable, because you know what this defense is going to do, the way they're going to bring it. And, can you live up to that competition on Tuesdays? But it probably makes you feel a little bit easier on Saturdays.
All right, into the division as we do some notes and nuggets here. So no tag. I don't think it's a surprise for Minnesota's Sam Darnold. So is that, Jim, the end of the line there in Minnesota for him? And is it J.J. McCarthy time?
I believe so. I think they'll re-sign Daniel Jones is what I think. They signed him late in the year from the Giants when he was released. Then they elevated him from practice squad to their 53-man roster. That way they also get a third-round draft compensation is what it'll be, because the Giants basically lost that. So I think Sam will be moving on. I think he'll be coveted. And then if McCarthy is not healthy, I would think Daniel Jones is using Darnold as a template, and that's why he wanted to sign in Minnesota, thinking he could step in, be the starter until McCarthy's healthy, and maybe rehab his career a little bit for the following year.
Thomas?
I got to think J.J. McCarthy better be healthy, or else is the severity of that injury kind of not really telling us the truth. Because I really thought, in kind of a callous way to say it, the best thing that ever happened to J.J. McCarthy was him tweaking his knee so he didn't have to play. I don't think they'll go and invest a $35 to $45 million contract in Darnold, because in those last two games that he finished the season with, why would you revert back to your old self at the most experienced time that you have throughout the course of that season? And someone else will go out there and pay him, and it's going to be a buyer beware deal for Darnold. But when you went out and drafted J.J. McCarthy as high as you did, you brought him in here to be the starter with a good quarterback head coach, and a guy that got to believe that he can develop him. Jim, do you think the NFL learned a lesson from the Deshaun Watson contract?
Yeah, it's an outlier. It's an outlier contract, and that's why owner Steve Bisciotti was so mad at the Baltimore Ravens, because he knew that contract was going to affect his ability to re-sign Lamar Jackson. And look, Lamar Jackson, that deal, after Watson signed, that deal to Lamar took literally almost 2.5 years to get completed, because every agent's going to want to point towards, no, we want a fully guaranteed, Deshaun Watson contract. And now that market has kind of settled down. Granted, guys are getting huge money, but they're not getting fully guaranteed contracts like Deshaun Watson, and it's really has hamstrung the Cleveland Browns. It really has. They got to hold on to him for 2 more years, realistically. I mean, there's nothing they can do.
I mean, there's a chance he'll never take another snap.
Yeah, realistically. And he hurt his Achilles again. I saw they just restructured his contract today because they can't cut him. They can't cut him. He is too financially, he cap straps them too much where they just cannot move on.
Tommy, you look like you're itching to say something.
No, I just, just paying attention to a little bit about the quarterback salaries, the ups and downs, and the investments in that position. And is there ever a lesson learned about how much they pay these guys, just like that big deal that Max Crosby got yesterday? Is it an over-the-top deal for the length of the contract, for how much they're paying him? But when you think about the $49+ million a year that's still owed to Deshaun Watson, do the owners learn anything from this? And are they kind of willing to try to take a step back instead of trying to re-up the next guy?
All right, boys, we're out of time. Put another one in the books. Can't wait till next week. Things are going to be popping, as they say, in the National Football League. I know I said this a couple years ago. The Bears were poised to make some noise. They still are poised to make some noise as they're putting together the 2025 version. That's going to do it for us. Thanks for listening, everybody. The executive producer of the Bears Radio Network is Eric Ostrowski. Thanks to our Bears producers, Dan Briley and Jordan Tredup, and in studio, Justin Pottinger, and our guest, John Harris from FootballTakeover.com. For Tom Thayer, Jim Miller, I'm Jeff Joniak. Have a great night, everybody. This has been Bears Weekly on the radio home of your Chicago Bears, ESPN.
Thank you for listening to the Chicago Bears Network presentation of Bears Weekly, hosted by the mayor of Bearsville, Jeff Joniak, and Surfmaster Tom Thayer. Podcasts are available on the Chicago Bears official app, brought to you by Verizon and Apple Podcasts. Bears Weekly has been brought to you by Miller Lite.